There's a Killer in My Town, Part 2, by Casper 1432. Callie, after all this time, something occurred to me. I never told you how I met Marcus, did I? I was 2 months into my first semester of college at Sonoma University. It was a dull place to be, despite the recent renovations that made it look interesting. I attended every class on time, completed my homework the nights they were assigned, and mainly kept to myself aside from making a few friends around campus. I was doing pretty well for myself considering that I was an 18-year-old kid in an unfamiliar town. Every day was the same as the next, well, at least until he came along. It was the day before Halloween. I was leaning against the dark blue colored wall beside my dorm room talking to a few other guys in surrounding rooms when I noticed him. He was dressed in a red t-shirt, dark denim jeans, and black shoes to match his watch. He was easily 6 foot tall with jet black hair and dark brown eyes that blended perfectly with his light brown skin. I was immediately taken when he flashed me a friendly smile that I barely noticed the resident advisor of the dormitory walking alongside him. I had no idea who he was, but I had never met a man more handsome. I thought that the odds of seeing him again were 1 in a million. However, the more the day went by, the more I saw of that handsome man. We would casually smile whenever we passed one another, either in the dormitory, in the cafeteria, or anywhere else on campus. This went on for a few months, but I never had the courage to introduce myself. He was a senior after all. I shook the tempting thoughts out of my mind and focused all of my time and energy into school. It was the weekend before Christmas break. I didn't have the best childhood, so going home wasn't on the top of my priority list until the next weekend. I remember sitting in my dorm room, working on an essay for one of my classes when something light tapped on the door. I was frustrated enough with my homework, so I wasn't happy about being interrupted. That was before I pulled open the door. Standing there with another friendly yet dashing smile was the man I had secretly been desiring. That was the exact point in time where he seized my heart and cemented our future. I knew I needed him more than anything else, and he became my everything. With that being said, I haven't written to you in a while, my dear sister. And I'm sorry for that, but things have gotten a little crazy around here. Comes with the territory of my job, it's just different this time. Guess I owe you an explanation. I'm just not sure where to begin. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My husband, Marcus, and I decided to have lunch in the park since it was a beautiful day and we would have privacy. You couldn't have a lunch date in a restaurant because any conversation overheard would be spread around the small town in less than an hour, and it was the last thing that I needed to have happen. I sat down on the picnic bench across from Marcus, our lunches already waiting to be devoured, except I didn't have an appetite. The trees rustled in the chilly breeze as I stared down at the wrapped sandwich in front of me. I really wanted to eat, I just couldn't. I wasn't having the best day, and I think Marcus could sense it. His fingers gently touched the bottom of my chin and lifted my head high enough to look at him. "You look stressed," Marcus said. "I am beyond stressed, babe. The station is a madhouse today." "Is that why you were called in during the middle of the night?" "Yeah, and I wish they hadn't," I sighed. "There was a murder last night. It was gruesome." "Well, tell me about it. It's my job to listen, isn't it?" "The sheriff was there when I arrived at the crime scene in the alley behind Mason's bar. He told me that I was called there for a reason, but that I shouldn't see the victim. You know me, though. I wasn't about to be called in and not see what was happening, despite being told to stay back, so I shoved past him. I ducked under the caution tape and laying there was... Was what? Officer Thompson, his entire torso was cut open. God. I paused. His organs were sitting on the ground beside him. It was so horrible, Marcus. Jesus, Dean. I'm so sorry. I know how close you and Ethan were. Marcus frowned. He placed his hand atop mine as a way of trying to comfort me. Ethan was my partner since day one. I can't believe he's gone, I sobbed. Marcus jumped up from his side of the picnic table, rushed over to my side and threw his arms around me. I usually tried not to let my emotions get the best of me, yet I couldn't help it. My work partner was murdered in the most terrible way, and there was no evidence to give us a lead in the case. I wasn't sure if we didn't have a lead because we were all so tired or if we were all too close to the investigation. All I know is that we needed something, and we needed it fast. It's going to be okay, honey. You're going to catch the bastard that did this. I know it. My lunch break is almost over. I should get back to the station. Okay, please be careful. I don't know what I'd do if I lost you because you were too upset to drive, Marcus said. I'll be fine. I love you, Dean. I love you too, I replied. Marcus held me tighter for a few more minutes before he kissed my cheek. I stood up from the table, threw our unfinished lunches into the nearby trash can, and silently walked with him to our cars. I waved to Marcus as he drove away from the park. However, all I could do was sit in my car and think about Officer Thompson. Ethan taught me everything I knew. How to watch my back when in the field, how to be stealthy if you were on a stakeout, or simply trying to apprehend a suspect, and always call for backup. He used to tell me to never chase after a suspect without someone covering you. Ethan knew better than to go into that damn alley alone. So why did he? I angrily punched the steering wheel a couple of times after starting the car. I backed out of the parking spot I was in and sped off towards the police station. I really didn't want to go back because I didn't want to hear about how everyone else was affected by Ethan's sudden death. Yeah, they had known him a lot longer than I had, but I was the one whom spent the most time with him over the last 3 years. The rest of the day went by as slowly as expected. Everyone began their morning process while I was on lunch, and that only pissed me off more. I understood. I really did, yet they didn't seem to realize how much it bothered me to hear them talk about Ethan the way that they had. Some weren't actually upset about his death, while the rest of them talked about him as if he had been dead for years. I sat at my desk for the remainder of the day with headphones in to keep myself from yelling at everyone else to shut the hell up. I filled out the paperwork that needed to be done, filled out arrest forms, and made sure that the jail cells were actually locked and no one in custody could walk out of here because of the other officers not paying attention to what they're supposed to be doing. I sat at my desk, carefully studying every single photo taken at the crime scene. I wasn't sure how long I had sat there, but the sun had already set when I finally tucked the photos into a case file. I stood up from my chair, stretched my sore limbs, and shut the lamp off. I grabbed my coat off the back of my chair, made sure that my phone was in my pants pocket, and slowly walked towards the door. The sheriff pulled me aside before I could exit the building. I was glad to see that I wasn't the only one working late, but when he asked me to visit Ethan's family, I reluctantly agreed, walked out of the police station, and got into my car. I drove as slowly as possible to figure out the best way to break the news to Ethan's wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids, Max and Hermione. Fuck. There wasn't a good way to tell anyone that their loved one had passed away. I pulled up alongside the curb in front of Ethan's house. I stepped out of my car and took my time walking up the stairs. I exhaled a deep breath and hesitantly rang the doorbell. It took less than a minute for the front door to swing open. Sarah had a worried expression plastered on her face while the kids anxiously stood on either side of her. I explained the situation as gracefully as I could because of the kids. However, the 3 of them broke down in tears, leaving me to awkwardly pull them into a hug. The other officers might have been close to Ethan, but no one was as close to him as I was. Otherwise, they'd be right here watching Sarah try to calm down Max and Hermione. That shit really takes a toll on people, especially me. I gave my condolences many times before hurrying out of that unsettling situation. I returned home about 20 minutes after leaving Ethan's house. I just couldn't handle seeing his family so distraught. My stomach was tied in knots when I stepped inside the front door of my house. I took off my jacket, hung it up on the coat rack, took off my belt and tossed it on the small table beside the door. Marcus was laying on the couch when I walked into the living room. Light snoring echoed throughout the room despite the television quietly playing in the background. I leaned over the couch, put my hand on his leg and shook him. It took a while, but Marcus finally woke up rather confused. "Come on, let's go to bed," I said. "What time is it?" he asked. "About 10 o'clock. "Huh. I must have fallen asleep after dinner." "Probably. I called 7 times and you didn't answer." "Did you have dinner?" "No," I shook my head. "I've been looking at the crime scene photos all day. I couldn't keep anything down even if I tried." "You need to eat, Dean," he frowned. I shook my head once more and started for the staircase. "I'm going to bed, I'm tired." "I'll be up in a minute." "Okay." I trudged up the staircase exhausted and consumed in my thoughts. I walked down the hallway into the bathroom and closed the door behind me. I brushed my teeth as quickly as my tired arm would let me before making my way to the bedroom. I didn't bother to flip the light switch on. Instead, I stripped down to my boxers when Marcus walked in. The cool sheets of the king-size bed enveloped me as I lay down, the comforter coaxing me to the land of sleep as Marcus slid his arm around my shoulder and pulled me closer to him. My head rested against his chest. His steady heartbeat was a soothing, familiar sound, yet my heart was filled with sorrow for the loss of my best friend and guilt of having to deliver the bad news to his family. Ethan gets out of his cruiser, his flashlight illuminating the dark alley surrounding him. He slowly turns to look down the cramped area when something in the distance rumbles and makes him jump, quickly spinning around and shining his light on the old, decrepit dumpster he had parked by. The lump in his throat and fragrance from yesterday's trash rotting nearby caused his throat to be hoarse and his voice to be rough. "Who's there?" He struggled to maintain the commanding tone he was going for. "I need you to come with your hands where I can see him." There was a moment of silence between the two of us. Him focusing his light on where he thought the sound came from, and myself analyzing the entire situation. I slowly stood up from where I had been crouched and hiding. My hands, comfortable, pressed into the pockets of my dark jacket, my left hand tightly gripping the handle of a small knife. I stepped toward him quickly, my shoes not making a sound despite the shards of broken glass and loose rocks scattered throughout the alleyway. I stepped slowly, and to the rhythm of the city around us, the darkness was my cover in the night, and the slight sounds of the late night city masked the sound of my feet pressed against the concrete. I pulled my hands from my pockets and poised myself to strike. When I was certain that nothing could go wrong, I lifted the blade and ran it across his neck, pulling as hard as I could to eliminate any margin of error. It had to be quick, and it had to be deep. Ethan jumped as the blade ran across his throat. The flashlight fell from his hand and hit the concrete with a metallic clunking noise. He attempted to turn and look at me, but the immediate and extensive blood loss had ripped the consciousness from his mind, and he was dead before his head bounced off the concrete. I knelt down beside his lifeless body and rolled him over to his back. My eyes met with his. They were motionless and gray. His face would forever remain in that twisted stare of surprise, that look of being caught off guard and having your entire life removed, within what was less than half a minute. I quickly got to work, unbuttoning his shirt and staring at his aged skin. The knife in my hand craved to cut him open, It needed to carve into his cold flesh. I slowly positioned the blade over him and measured in my mind how far it would need to be, and where to cut and where to start. The metal pierced his stomach and I started to slowly glide it through his body. The knife gliding across aged and rough skin without an issue, causing it to gradually loosen and pull apart. I awake to my body being violently shaken, my eyes groggily open to see Marcus peering down at me with a worried expression plastered to his face. I leisurely sat upright in the bed and turned to look at him. However, he raised his arm, a bright light temporarily blinding me. It took half a second for my eyes to adjust to the brightness before I realized that the message displayed on the screen of my cell phone was a text message from another officer, Tanya Hastings. She was always the bearer of bad news. Oh, Tanya. How I wish you hadn't disturbed me. I shook my head out of disappointment and annoyance. Was I not allowed to have one night of peaceful sleep? I threw the comforter off my legs and dangled them over the edge of the bed. Marcus said nothing as I stood up. A heavy sigh escaped my lips when I picked up last night's discarded clothes and quickly stepped into them. Marcus knew not to question. He knew to lay back down and go to sleep while I headed off to work. I trudged out of the bedroom, down the staircase, and into the living room where I retrieved my shoes. I strapped my belt on, slid into my jacket, and slammed the front door shut as I stepped onto the porch. The chilly night air ripped at my warm cheeks as I went to my car. The quiet neighborhood surprisingly wasn't woken up when the loud engine of my car started. I backed out of the driveway and sped off toward the direction of the latest crime. Sheriff Callahan was standing at the gate to Snow Creek Cemetery when I pulled into the small driveway. I hesitantly shut the car off, stepped onto the recently placed cement. My shoes sunk into the spots that hadn't yet dried. The car door shut when the sheriff approached me. I appreciate you coming here, Dean. We really need all hands on deck with this situation. Sheriff Callahan distraughtly said. Why am I here? I angrily asked. He said nothing as he hastily walked away. I too remained silent while following his lead. We walked past the cemetery gate and into the first row of tombstones. The only reason you were here is strictly for a set of fresh eyes, understood? Yeah, I nodded. We continued to the site where the investigative lights were set up. I stepped underneath the caution tape, pushing my way through the crowd of officers, only to see another victim. My heart felt like it had sunk into the pit of my stomach upon seeing the same display as Ethan. Short, silver hair rested just above the latest victim's shoulders. Her eyes still had the look of fear even though they were white and glassed over. Her throat had been slashed from right to left. Her torso completely cut open, each organ laid in a perfect line besides her body. God damn it, Winnie, I muttered. What the fuck were you doing out here alone? Officer Michaels was checking out a complaint made by the groundskeeper. He said someone was lurking around the cemetery. She could have waited for backup, Sheriff Callahan said. I angrily stood up from the sound and shot him a menacing glare. Why the hell wasn't someone with her? Especially after what happened to Ethan, I questioned. Too many of the officers are afraid to patrol the streets at night. Winifred insisted that she was able to handle the job by herself. By herself? I was taken aback by this statement. What the hell is wrong with you people? You all know damn well that we double up when someone is killing our own. I swear, you are all a bunch of cowards. Calm down, Callahan warned, or else I'll have you escorted off the scene. The authoritative tone of voice wasn't something I had the pleasure of experiencing until now. I considered standing my ground. Could he not see the situation could have easily have been avoided? My apologies, sir, I relented. I just don't think it's right to let officers patrol alone right now. For this exact reason. We need to enforce our policies to keep everyone safe. Well then, would you care to patrol with Officer Nielsen on the night shift? The question felt sarcastic, but I decided to answer it anyway. If it means keeping another officer from being harmed, then yes, I would. I kept my focus on him. My stare was stern and unwavering. "Go home," he said, shaking his head and sighing. "Get some rest. You start your patrol tonight." I nodded in agreement before walking away from the scene. I had a feeling that something like this was bound to happen after he had found Ethan. I felt like I should have said something sooner, like it would have made a difference. I knew that Callahan was about to be retired, but he might not get the chance if we kept losing officers like this. The loud buzzer of the alarm clock woke me up around 8:45 on Wednesday evening. I lazily rolled out of bed, took a quick shower, got dressed, and made my way down the staircase. Marcus was sitting on the couch, paperwork and case files spread across the coffee table, while he mindlessly stared at the television. He wasn't thrilled, no. He was disappointed that I had made the decision to patrol at night without talking to him first. However, he understood the reason why I was doing it. I swore to protect the citizens of this town. That included fellow officers. The news wasn't reporting something of importance. Thankfully, the press hadn't caught wind of the recent murders. The last thing we need right now is to have the town in a panic. "How did you sleep?" Marcus asked. I hadn't realized his attention was directed at me. Like shit," I sighed. "It's different sleeping alone." "I know, but you're doing the right thing. Trying to, at least. No one seems to understand how bad this is. It's like they don't care." "Everyone grieves in a different way, Dean. They care even if it doesn't seem like it." "No offense, but you weren't there, babe. You didn't see." I paused. I carefully thought of the right way to explain the delicacy of the situation without sounding like a douchebag. The look in both Ethan and Winnie's eyes were pure terror. Did they even have time to understand what was happening when the person attacked them? "Listen, you were a good man and I understand why you're doing this. Believe me, I do. We both know you can't save everyone. No matter how hard you try, just don't change the way you are because other people seem like they aren't taking this as seriously as they should," he sweetly says. My husband says some of the greatest things. He has the best intentions, I knew that. He wasn't there. He didn't see what I did, so he doesn't exactly understand how this is affecting me. I want to talk about it. I don't know how, though. I can't express my feelings right now without yelling. Be thankful you do not have to see what I do. I have to get to work. I'll call you later. Hey, no matter what happens out there tonight, just remember that I love you, he smiled. I love you too, I said. Marcus stood up from the couch as I walked toward the front door. I should eat something, but my stomach won't be able to handle it. Not yet, at least. I grabbed my belt, wrapped it around my waist, and fastened it as Marcus kissed my cheek. The one good thing about being with Marcus is that he always been there for me, no matter the situation. He had been the rock in my life. He waved goodbye while I walked to my car. I shouldn't have agreed to patrol at night. I wanted to be at home, keeping my husband safe. However, I wasn't going to let another officer be harmed because no one is following the procedure to double up. Fucking cowards. Officer Nielsen and I met up at the police station. I reluctantly got into his police cruiser. Something about this guy didn't sit right with me. Luke and I weren't close, sure. We'd had a few conversations every once in a while, but I wouldn't say that we were friends. My mind was focused on the 2 cases we had so far while Luke drove up and down random streets. My gaze glued to the windshield in front of me to spot any sort of suspicious activity. There were a few people staggering out of Mason's bar. They stood on the sidewalk to smoke a cigarette before heading off in different directions. I made a note of the descriptions on my cell phone in case something were to happen throughout the shift. Night patrol was just as boring as everyone claimed it to be. even before Officer Thompson and Officer Michaels died. Vivid images of the dream I had the previous night flashed through my mind, which caused my chest to heavily rise and fall. I could feel myself beginning to panic. I hadn't told Marcus about the dream yet. I didn't want to worry him. I closed my eyes for a few moments in an attempt to gather myself. I shook the images from my head along with the dark thoughts and opened my eyes to see that we were heading towards the post office. I was certain Luke had noticed my odd behavior, but I'm hoping he hadn't. I wasn't sure how long it had been since we left the station. A few hours, maybe? I was stuck on this idea until his voice brought me out of my thoughts. "So, how are things with you and Marcus?" Luke inquired. "We're fine," I hesitated to answer. "What about you and Christine?" Christine and I broke up a while ago. She couldn't handle the stress about worrying when or if I would come home. "Wow, that sucks. I'm sorry, man." I don't blame her. This job gets intense at times, especially now, you know? Yeah. Something about his statement was incredible, uncaring. "I've been meaning to see how you were doing after Officer Thompson. You guys were real close." "Can we not talk about Ethan? No offense, but..." I caught myself in this sentence, realizing the unintentional can of worms I may have just opened. "Go ahead and say it, Dean." "Fuck, I'm really sorry, Luke. I was so wrapped up in my own grief that I didn't stop to think how you must be feeling. He was your uncle after all." "Huh. You know, you're the first person in the department that was actually mentioned that." "Yeah. Ethan was my uncle. He raised me and all that. But you were like a son to him." "I can guarantee that he'd be devastated had it been you," Luke said. "What's your plan to catch the sick fuck who is doing this?" "My plan? What do you mean, my plan?" "Come on, Randall. I was there last night when you yelled at Sheriff Callahan. You must have a plan if you were willing to take the night shift." "I don't have a plan, Collins. The only thing I'm focused on right now is making sure that no one else gets hurt." What was he expecting me to say? "Come in, Officer Collins." The dispatcher cut into the conversation. Luke and I shared concerned expressions as he picked up the receiver. He let out a shaky sigh before pressing the button and responding. "Go for Collins." "Have you seen Officer Jenkins, Phillips, and Curtis?" "No, ma'am." "They responded to a 1062 about 6 hours ago near the intersection of Hallow Drive and Main Street. Can you check it out?" "Copy." Luke didn't bother to turn on the siren while he stomped on the gas pedal. He swerved in and out of a few cars that were on the road. There was no warning when he quickly turned left and pulled up the emergency brake. He sped down Main Street before the car came to an abrupt stop. My head hit the dashboard, pain instantly radiating throughout my body. Never in my life had I been more grateful to be wearing a seatbelt. This kid drove like a maniac. Headlights illuminated the darkened street. My eyes scanned the surrounding area, yet I froze when I noticed 3 dark figures laying on the ground in a perfectly straight line, as if they had been running from something. An annoying beeping noise filled my ears as the overhead lights in the car turned on. I looked toward the driver's seat to see that Luke was already out of the car. I hastily unstrapped my seatbelt and jumped out of the car. "Get your ass back here, Lucas," I hissed. "Call for backup now," he shouted. Great. I had been trying to be quiet in case anyone lurking nearby could hear us, but he had to go and be dramatic about the situation. I pressed the button on the walkie strapped to my shoulder. "Dispatch," I said. "Go ahead." "We're on the intersection of Hallow Drive and Main Street. I believe we found Officer Jenkins, Phillips, and Curtis. Call the sheriff." "Dean," Luke shouted once more. My feet carefully approached Luke and the 3 figures, despite the voice in my head that was telling me to get the hell out of there. The scene before me was appalling. Philip and Curtis were the same as Thompson and Michaels had been. Their throats were slashed from right to left. Torso open and organs laid neatly beside their bodies. The only difference between the other two murders and these two was that Officer Jenkins was still breathing. At least that's what it looked like. Luke knelt beside Jenkins, pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck and sighed in relief. "Is he alive?" I asked. Luckily, something must have startled the killer just before he could kill Jenkins. Okay, but what could have scared the person killing officers? Pretty sure he can tell us that. Luke shook his head. A low moan sounded. Luke and I glanced down at Dimitri as he stirred a bit. We helped him sit up just as sirens sounded in the distance. Dimitri held his forehead and groaned before he slowly glanced up at us. "What happened?" Dimitri asked. "We were hoping you could tell us," I replied. "It's all fuzzy. I got the call about a possible breaking and entering. I responded, so did Kyle and Micah. Are they okay?" "They didn't make it," Luke sadly answered. "I don't know what happened. One minute the 3 of us were about to enter the building. He pointed past us. Then I woke up and you guys were here." Dimitri sighed. Blue and red lights brightened the area, even though we were standing beneath a streetlight. Car doors slammed shut. Sheriff Callahan was speedily walking towards us. "I want you two at the station to write up a report." Callahan shot us a stern look. "Jenkins will give us his statement before going to the hospital." "Yes, sir," Luke nodded. I bit my tongue and followed Luke back to his cruiser. I had my opinions, but I knew better than to get on Callahan's bad side, considering the newest murders. 3 officers were at the building, yet 2 of them still died. Whoever was killing our officers were smart, highly confident and capable of taking down multiple people at once, without leaving any evidence. How were we supposed to catch the person killing people if they didn't leave evidence? Luke and I remained silent while driving back to the police station. I spent the next few hours writing up a report on what happened. My stomach churned with every awful detail that I typed onto the computer. I printed out my report, placed it on the sheriff's desk, and left the police station. That was my least favorite part about being a cop. Writing up reports about the messed up things I had to see or that stupid shit I had to deal with on shift. I returned home 15 minutes after leaving the station. I tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter and carefully treaded through the dark living room. I tripped on the stairs, cursed at myself for being clumsy. It was my own house. I knew my way in and out even in the dark. I stripped out of my clothes once I made it into the bedroom. I crawled into the plush king-size bed and tightly hugged Marcus. He was sound asleep, but I didn't care, because he was safe and in my arms. I woke up late Thursday afternoon. Marcus lay beside me, reading through papers from his own work. I scooted closer to him. A cute smile creeped onto his lips. He placed his right arm around my shoulders and held me against him. Tanya called earlier this morning. Officer Kincaid was found behind the police station. She said he was murdered in the same way the others were, he explained. "I think I'm going to take a few days off. I can't handle this right now." "All right, so I'll take a few days off as well." "You don't have to do that." "Of course I do, honey. My job is to be here when you need me, and that includes right now." "I am very lucky to have you, Marcus," I smiled. "No, I'm the lucky one," he chuckled. I leaned up as far as I could, kissed him and hugged him tighter than I ever had. You might have been hoping for a romantic fairy tale idea of how Marcus and I met. Unfortunately, life doesn't work like that, but it was close enough. Marcus had been and will continue to be the light in my life, aside from you. Like I said, this week has been crazy and I feel guilty for not writing sooner, but at least you know the reason why. Talk soon, little sister. I love you. Dean.